it's really a labor of love from the very beginning, from the first edition. I spent the better part of my career in this function. And so I recognize the importance of labeling to the safety and efficacy of healthcare products, to the importance overall, as just as important as the product itself in most cases. And the fact that it's a public-facing component, and so it has a range of users for different products for different reasons. It's a very impactful regulatory function and deliverable. So, and I also specialized in communications for another part of my career. So I know the skills that are needed to, and the challenges that you encounter in trying to create and manage information that's understandable for the target audience. But it really came about originally because I do know that this very specialized corner of regulatory is underappreciated, even by colleagues that work with the labeling function. So, but that's what, and they don't realize that labeling is where all the action is. It all basically comes down to labeling. So it's really a campaign for visibility, to raise the visibility of not only everything that the labeling function entails. It's really an iceberg with just the tip of it showing, but also the overall importance and the critical nature of what these labeling professionals do. And I know that all the contributors to the various editions have felt the same way, that we want to amplify appreciation for labeling and the people who are involved in the function. Well, RAPS actually engaged me at the absolute perfect time, because there had been certain developments that we mainly anticipated in the first edition, but and spoke about in a way that anticipated what was likely to happen. But it made sense that it really merits an update now to go back to the original content and update it, refresh it. But also there were new topics and other topics that we wanted to add and expand into, so that we basically told the whole story of labeling. So we started out by mapping out the desired contents, including the new topics. And then the next step was to recruit currently active professionals who are experts in their area. And that's important, that they have this fresh practical experience. And what they did was they reviewed all of the content and they updated the existing chapters. They checked the references, they checked the links. I mean, these, companies and health authorities are notorious for changing where the URLs go to and where resources wind up. And then we had some of them write entirely new chapters. Some of the topics we had a little bit of content on and we wanted to expand, but some were brand new. And then when we looked at it, as I say, we want to tell the entire narrative of labeling, the whole story, and so we structured it with its a logical flow, and it flows from the foundational concepts and basic principles all the way through to the chapters that focus on certain regions, certain specialized products, and then we integrated the new content accordingly. So again, I want to underscore that the second edition is entirely refreshed, and it really benefits from the contributions of a number of new contributors who took a fresh look at it. And I thank RAPS throughout the entire process. I worked very closely with the director of publications, Jen Zayas, and our editor, Kate Schomaker, and it was great working with them. And there's always something going on in labeling, and there's small p politics of the interpersonal interactions of organizations, but really because of the nature of the function and the public facing exposure of the deliverable, it sometimes gets buffeted by the headwinds of politics with a capital P. And they've there's some examples where it has affected some major labeling initiatives with implications for public health. So I can give two examples that I was directly involved with and observed. The first one being e-labeling or electronic labeling. And for decades, there's been an effort driven by a coalition led by the industry, but involving representatives of healthcare professionals and even FDA's involvement, to eliminate the need to print and package prescribing information with the product. This is the 21st century, and so we're able to disseminate information electronically. Of course, the interest of industry, number one, is to reduce cost. These things are expensive to print. Sometimes the packages have to be expanded to accommodate the size. The tablecloth size leaflets written in tiny, tiny little print, and unfortunately, it represents a lot of waste. Sometimes we heard one public meeting at FDA was that the pharmacists take them out of the box and throw them away. So, besides the fact that it's a waste and has implications for the environment in that case, the fact that it's a major expense, it also lends itself to becoming outdated as it sits on the shelf, while the electronic versions may be updated immediately. So there's all kinds of energies around this, but it was taking a long time because a lot of research was going into the justification of making this change, but it was halted in fits and starts at various stages, and with one major roadblock being a poison pill put into a bit of legislation by one of our senators, who was acting basically on behalf of his supporters in the printer and packaging industries, printer and paper industries. So, that's politics, and it impacted public health. We still have to print these things, and people can still wind up reading outdated information. So that's one example. Another example relates to written patient labeling. So labeling is written either for the healthcare professionals, that's the prescribing information, or for patients. And in the US, we have arrived at a situation where we have multiple different versions of that. So you're familiar with the patient package inserts for oral contraceptives. Some other products require medication guides that are written, and these are required by FDA, reviewed by FDA after they're written by the sponsors. There's also the thing that you might be most familiar with, which is the consumer medicine information that's printed out at the point of dispensing. And these are written by publishers and not reviewed by anybody, or at least they're not reviewed by the FDA. So we're in this situation. But as far back as the decades ago, before the 1980s, there's been an effort to standardize a requirement on behalf of quality and consistency and accessibility. And there was a proposed regulation by FDA that was halted in the 1980s because it got caught up in the Reagan administration's efforts to roll back regulation. So what does that mean? Then that threw it back to a voluntary initiative that was led by industry to improve the quality and availability and consistency that wound up being less than optimal. So it didn't stop things. Of course, there's still the efforts move to progress forward on this and maybe get into a situation that other regions and countries are, where it's more standard. And I think something may be, in the offing soon. But it's just another example of labeling getting caught on the horns of politics and affecting public health. So yes, there's labeling that is written for patients, and it's not meant to be just a distillation of or a translation of what is written for prescribers, or it's just meant for devices or medicines that are used for patients directly. Um, but it's written specifically for them, and when it is, the goal is to satisfy their individual needs in their role as patients. And that's why it's not a direct translation, because it's a completely different role. So you have to address their distinct needs, information needs, and you have to present it in the understandable way that, as you said, is a challenge, or it can be a challenge because of the range of literacy, for example. And that's just one of the challenges: the complexity of the products, the range of literacy of patients. But one thing you might not appreciate, and actually you did allude to it, the people who are writing these labels are PhDs and MDs, and they have advanced degrees. And well, we understand it, so it might, why do it's understandable. So it might not be directly, immediately apparent when something wouldn't be understandable to a patient to them. But I wouldn't shine a light in the sky and call upon health, human factors testings just yet. I mean, there's things to do before that. So way upstream, when you're writing the labeling, you begin with identifying what information the patient needs about the product, how to use the product, what are the risks and benefits, etc. And actually, there are references for this, and one of the very good ones is FDA's reference on the consumer medicines information that we talked about earlier, and that helps you identify what information you must give to patients. Then there's also the tools and techniques that appear in certain references, like the CDC's Simply Put, that address creating something that's understandable by not only the language that you use, but the organization, the prominence of certain elements, the images, and then you get to the point where you have something that you can test, and you're testing something for feedback onto where it can be improved and in practical settings. So for devices, for drug and device combinations, human factors testing is a go-to. But also in Europe, there's a general requirement that the patient leaflets there's user testing conducted on them in practical settings. So it really flows from identifying the needs of the patients, crafting the material to understanding, and then testing it for improvement. The first would be to say that, well, a good source of information might be health authorities themselves. The health authorities are continually assessing labeling across products. They've got a lot of information about quality, about issues. Then they're always doing research into best practices in communications, and then generating regulations to help shore up the standards of quality and dissemination and operations and everything that goes into it. So if you just, that might be a good source of information, a good way to point to issues that are common to sponsors is, well, what's the latest regulation addressing? Or the regulations also address new issues, so you don't know if it was something just totally new faced by everyone. Something else that I have observed in my experience is that industry, or the companies I've worked with, don't always allow adequate time for labeling, or actually allow labeling the time allotted for it to erode. Labeling is the last document in the dossier that can be finalized, because you can start working on it and drafting it, but you can't finalize it until all of the documents that it depends on are finalized upstream. So the summaries and the overviews and all of that. And so if they eat up extra time in the project plan or in the dossier plan, labeling gets squeezed because the deadlines for submission are not going to get moved. So I'm just taking the opportunity to voice that as a frustration of my earlier years. And then one more point that I could make, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of information out there, but there is a sense that sponsors might not be taking full advantage of this concept of target labeling that was introduced in the 1990s, where you use desired labeling claims to guide development plans. It's not clear that it's being fully embraced because, as I said, there's not a lot of published research that has done a survey about it. Although I know that it is used by some of the larger companies, more highly resourced companies. So it might be a missed opportunity because there is some evidence that this tool improves submission efficiencies, and the whole idea behind it too is to facilitate interactions with health authorities. And we do have some data that shows that it does smooth the path for submissions. Well, we wanted to actually, it was something that was something that we wanted to include from the get-go. Labeling and packaging are critical considerations during all stages of development, including at the investigational stage. And investigational products are different from marketed products. And the users are different than the investigators have different needs than the clinicians. So it was something that we wanted to include because it helps tell as I said, the whole story of labeling. But the first edition was such a huge endeavor to bring forth from the void of nothingness, that we really just couldn't tackle everything. So unfortunately, that was something that we weren't able to include. But it was a gap that was immediately apparent, and I've already had it already recorded for something that we needed to tackle for this edition. And fortunately, we were able to recruit subject matter experts, not only to include content on that, but on other specialized topics as well. So, including the labeling for investigational materials. Yeah, there was some cannabis content in the first edition that was included in the U.S. Section, because the U.S. is where it's the Wild West, right, where things are constantly changing. The way this unit is structured is it starts with a general presentation of the therapeutic potential of cannabis and interest in it as a healthcare agent. And then it gets into the evolving regulatory situation. So it highlights the independent actions of the various states in the face of the intransigence by, federal intransigence over its scheduling, and then it gets into the labeling, the initiatives for the labeling and the packaging standards. And then once again, because of the lack of oversight by FDA, the standards, the initiatives were led by industry, basically. And the standards were based on pharma and product regulations and best practices, and also the Department of Justice trigger areas for cannabis, like use in children, pregnancy, driving. Those were trigger points for action by the Department of Justice, as well as the needs that were shared by the various programs in the states, where they have different suites of accepted conditions or accepted formulations, vaping or ingestibles and however else it comes. So pharma and its regulations really has influenced the voluntary standards for cannabis packaging, as I understand it. Now, if you're asking me to look to the future and see around corners for the third edition. I really can't. I mean, I really can't say how things will evolve, but I do believe that there are some ineluctable trends, and I'm thrilled with the chance to use ineluctable. It's my favorite word. But there's some ineluctable trends, and that is in the ever expanding access to cannabis as a medical treatment, or just in general access to cannabis products, and the consequent need for information, for good quality information by its various users, the caregivers as well as the patients. So one thing I would point out too is that because it's such a hyper dynamic situation, the chapter offers guidance on resources that will allow the readers to stay up to date as things change. Well, number one is labeling is a thrilling place to be. It's a nonstop rodeo of incredible action. There's always something going on. There's always time constraints and stress and high visibility, and senior management getting very eager to know whether you're using must or recommends or should. So it's and it has touch points with everything. So as a function, it's ever evolving. Just the function itself. There's research into effective communication. There's changes in regulation. There's changes in technology. There's new treatments. There's enhanced patient advocacy. There are all kinds of reasons why just the environment that you're operating in changes. Well, just to go through everybody that should read it and why, it's really essential, as you say, for people who are in industry and involved in development of healthcare products in any capacity, because it all comes down to labeling. What they're working toward is the labeling, is the product with the labeling. Regulatory specialists who are more involved with labeling really need to understand the context of their contribution, why they're doing what they're doing, and how perhaps what they're doing influences other regions, labeling in other regions, how it all interacts. And also that I want them to appreciate what their colleagues in the labeling function are doing. Labeling professionals will be familiar with a lot of the content of this book, but the scope of it is very broad, and it likely will go beyond their immediate experience. So, just to have a comprehensive reference on in the department would be useful. And I think especially as a supplement to training materials, especially as it's a guide to where do you find current information, what are the resources out there. One other group that I think would benefit from it are healthcare providers in general. I think that it would really inform them about how labeling relates to product development for their healthcare products. Also, how the role of labeling is distinct from their role. They can't abdicate their role of advising and counseling patients to labeling. They can't just throw a package insert at somebody. They need to understand that it's a tool for them. I recommend it for pharmacies and institutions that have programs in healthcare disciplines like pharmacy schools, especially pharmacy schools. It might actually, what I'm hopeful of is that it would spark interest in this special, the area as a career direction. Because it's, well, besides being a rollicking good read, it's really a collective effort by a team of practicing experts who really know their stuff. They're dedicated to the excellence in labeling and packaging, and they're eager to inform others about this critical function. Somebody could search the internet for answers, information about any of the topics that we cover, but they still wouldn't be assured that they've hit upon authoritative information, current information, the full story, everything they need to know about it. So this book offers that. So it's a dynamic, comprehensive, detailed reference on a very important component of healthcare.